Welcome to SEC Sports Roundtable. This is your host, Shane Bailey, doing another SEC Sports preview. We are breaking down all 14 teams. We're going to start off in the East this week, and we're going to be an East-heavy week. So if you're a fan of the East or you're just needing to know more information about the East, this is going to be your week. We're going to get 3 teams in this week. We've got our schedule in place. That's the first time we've had all 3 teams for our preview in place before we start the week. So we're going to do University of Florida tonight. We're going to do a back-to-back, and then Monday will be Vanderbilt, and Wednesday will be South Carolina. No, I messed that all up. We're going back and forth. See, I can't even get it straight in my own head. We're going back and forth, and we're doing East-West, East-West-East. Yeah, sorry. So we are going to really start off the week with Florida. I was correct there. Tomorrow is Ole Miss. We're going to go back to the West. Then we're going to go to back over to the East and do Vanderbilt Wednesday. But it's still going to be East heavy. Not all East, I guess. So sorry about that. I just misspoke about the week that I just scheduled. So we've had some back and forth on those and had to firm up a couple things that fell in place last minute. So I got that confused a little bit. But joining me tonight, we have Nick Jones from Bama Hammer. Welcome back, Nick.
What's going on, Shane? You doing all right?
Now that I can get the team straight, I think I'm doing okay.
Definitely have to do that.
Yeah, that's going to be important if we're going to be talking about football teams to know which ones we're going to be talking about. But, we are a fan-based podcast. We all have our allegiances, and we all try to talk from that. And as you get further on in this week, it should be a heavy-laden podcast full of some fans of some of those teams. Got a Vanderbilt guy coming on Wednesday. Got an Ole Miss guy tomorrow with the Mississippi State guy. So some good conversations there. But unfortunately, I don't have a Florida person, and so I get to talk bad about them the whole podcast. So Florida fans, just let me know right now. I'm a Kentucky guy. I hate to see you guys win. Last year was a great year. I hated to see that Driscoll got injured. We'll talk about that later. But the losses that mounted because of that was very encouraging for a Kentucky fan. So I was happy to see that. Nick's an Alabama fan. That's why he writes for Bama Hammer. He does a lot on the basketball and some baseball side. Is that correct?
Yeah, just today I was working on our non-conference preview of Alabama's schedule. So it's never too early to talk about basketball, everybody. And I know Shane knows that, and we'll agree.
Yeah, hey, we can do a basketball podcast right now.
Yeah, let's just. What is football? We don't need football, right?
Football. Kentucky. They got no. I still love football. So.
Oh, me too, definitely.
Yeah, it's still number one as far as watching, and it takes most of the conversation from the calendar year. But we do these almost every week. During this preview, we're doing 2 and 3 a week to get you caught up so that you're able to be informed before the season starts. But it's on anywhere you want to look for a podcast: iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher Radio. We have a website. If you just type in SECSRT, that's the Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, you find all of our podcasts right there. So they're pretty easy to find. You can subscribe, like, comment. Love to have some interaction there. Feel free to reach out to us there. But that's how you can reach out and get a hold of us and watch us and listen to us. So we appreciate you finding us, stumbling across us, and listening in. So we're going to get right into the University of Florida preview. I kind of teased a little bit. The season went south for Florida last year, pretty much after the Driscoll leg injury. You're breaking that leg. They never recovered and were never the same team. Wouldn't you agree?
Exactly, and I think there's a lot of other injuries we can talk about too. But if you lose your starting quarterback, obviously that's a big problem. And I think it's also interesting to mention just randomly, but a lot of Florida fans and SEC fans in general remember Jacoby what was his last name? Brissett, I think it was. He's now at NC State. So a guy that Driscoll battled with and was kind of, they were thinking about a 2-quarterback system there for a year or two. He's gone now. So it's Driscoll's, Driscoll. We've talked about a lot, too, that Driscoll's one of the most, probably game-wise, the most experienced returning starter in the SEC, which is kind of hard to believe considering that we've had this run of just outstanding starting quarterbacks.
Yeah, if you look at the at the East, he probably is. I mean, Vanderbilt's quarterback's up in the air. No real game time experience from a lot of those. Kentucky, same thing. Georgia, after a long stint with Murray, you've got South Carolina. Dylan Thompson is going to be up there. He had a lot of action over the last couple of years. I remember going into last year, which is funny, is that he didn't have a quarterback. They both were going to be starting quarterbacks, and that didn't last very long in that whole scenario. But that's the talk that Spurrier made. So Dylan's got some experience in the East. Then you look at Driscoll, Tennessee. Nothing there. So you're right. From the East side, it's Driscoll, and then on the West, you really just have Dak Prescott, who's got some real game time experience, and Arkansas's quarterback.
Yeah, and this is, I always like to, I know we don't do this every week, but I kind of like to gauge the feel. Obviously, I don't keep up with Florida football near as much, and it's kind of, that's why I would, not to say that Shane, you and I are a bad combo or anything, but I think it just makes for a much better, like last week with Blair was just a great podcast with somebody that's very passionate about their team. I mean, I'm sure it'll be great when, we do the Kentucky preview and when we do the Alabama preview. So I kind of have to immerse myself in, what the Kentucky fans are feeling. But the thing that I get out of, or not Kentucky, Florida, sorry. We're doing Florida today. But
I can tell you what Kentucky fans feel.
That's kind of been a consensus for a while, hasn't it? Yeah. But for the Florida fans, and as I listen, I know sports radio isn't the best place to get it, but that's kind of where I get a lot of my SEC-wide news and feelings and stuff. But one of the interesting things to me is I think it's kind of a consensus that a team like Mississippi State this year is kind of the dark horse to win the West. I mean, I think we talked about that last week in depth, but to me, Florida is a very mixed bag. You hear some people that say they could slide back to where they were last year or just a little bit better, and then there's some people, SEC media, I mean, some of the media media people at SEC Media Days picked them to finish first. So, they're kind of a team that I think their ceiling and their floor is kind of one of the greatest ones we've talked about yet.
Yeah, you make a really good point. When you look at these schedules, and we'll do that later in the podcast, you always say, well, they could win this one or they could lose this one. I don't think there's going to be a team that we talk about the rest of the season or before now that plays more of a decisive role than the Florida Gators, because you really do not know what's going to happen with those guys. If you remember last year's preview, Drew Young was on here, and Drew was, he was ready to give him the Heisman.
Yeah.
And so that's how capable of a quarterback Driscoll can be when he's healthy. I mean, I don't remember his record, but it's pretty impressive, his win-loss, what he's been able to do when he was on the field. The thing that's got me concerned, if you're a Florida fan, and I'll try to be impartial to some degree here, is that, they're not only did he get injured, they lost some offensive linemen as well. And so what's going to happen is, what kind of protection do you really have? And you're not going to know until they actually get on the field and you see what's going to happen in a game time situation. The good news for Florida is their schedule starts off pretty easy. So they get some time to work out some kinks and get some guys in play and see what you get on the offensive line. The other advantage is the guy they brought in from Duke, their assistant coach. Was that their third offensive head coach in 3 years behind the Notre Dame coach
Charlie Weiss.
Yeah, and last year Brent Peace from Boise State.
Yeah.
Some pretty prolific offenses that those guys had ran in the past, and then you go to Duke. You think they got somebody from Duke, and but Duke had a really strong offense last year. They were able to do things. What he's going to be is more of a shotgun pro-style set that Driscoll was brought in for. He'll be able to run and have more options with the Duke offensive coordinator, and I can't remember his name. Foster? I have to look at it. I'm sorry.
I will look at it in a second.
It's
Isn't it Curtis Roper, or is that somebody else?
Nope, I think
Kurt Roper, maybe.
Kurt Roper. That's it.
Yeah.
So that's the advantage, is that it really fits with the style that Driscoll is going to be most comfortable with. But is he going to have so much breakdown in front of him that that's all he's going to have to do is put together things and run out of the pocket? If he does, he's going to stand more chance to be injured, and you can look to have the closer to the season they had last year than finishing first in the East. But that's to me the biggest question mark is what do you have out there? And even though the practices this year, the spring practices were open, you still really don't have a gauge of what you're looking at on the offensive side of the ball with Florida.
Yeah, I think I hit on this a lot with LSU because I keep saying, I know that there's all these guys and you hear about, Florida's recruited well, even though Muschamp has had down years. He's kind of proven that he's a great recruiter. You look at some of the corners and the offensive linemen that they've had there in the past, and even running backs. They're getting skilled guys at skill positions that should put them in places to win in the SEC. And going back to the Kurt Roper thing, he's really known as a quarterback developer kind of guy. And I think that's going to be really good for Driscoll. And I think kind of what you're talking about is, we talked about these system guys and not getting players to fit in the exact kind of system. If he's, a shotgun kind of guy that can put Driscoll in the best situation possible to make the plays how he knows how to do them and how his skill set fits, I think that might be a big thing for Florida. And last year, it was kind of like Georgia was. It just went all downhill. You lost Driscoll, and then they lost a couple offensive linemen, like you said. I think they lost a linebacker, if I'm not mistaken. But the injury bug hit them hard. The East was very injury-ridden last year. But that's something you can't control. And, Shane, I don't have the stat in front of me, but I heard this the other day. And last year, Florida, I think Muschamp is either undefeated or really close to undefeated when they win the turnover battle. But I think that's what went south last year is they had so many turnovers. And like we talk about, sometimes you can't prevent turnovers, but a lot of that was also having inexperience at the quarterback, losing your starting quarterback for part of the season.
Yeah, and that crazy theme is popping back up again, the turnover battle. Can you win that turnover battle? What will that do for your season? I had to look it up. He was 12-3 as a starter, Driscoll was.
Which is crazy to think about because I just don't get that feeling from him. You think about a 12-3, you would think about somebody like Aaron Murray. Maybe we give Driscoll, he wasn't winning flashy games, but they were winning games. So. No,
it's you're right. It's silly to think that, but you got to look at the year prior. The first year, Muschamp. No, he wasn't the quarterback then. I take that back. Never mind. But you look at 12-3. It's a little misleading because you don't think that the quarterback was that good, but he was effective. He did what it took to win games. Their running back situation, it firmed up a little bit last year. What kind of advances can they make? Because that's going to be the other strong issue from the offensive side is what are you going to have to relieve him? Because if he's got to rely on his own footwork and his own passing ability, and they become one-dimensional, truly one-dimensional, it's going to be harder. Because let's face it, he's not Manziel. When he breaks out of the pocket and things break down, I don't think he's going to be able to make things happen like Manziel did at A&M. So what can they have on that side of the ball to be effective and to continue to move forward? The advantage, though, is the East. Plain and simple, you're playing the SEC East. You've got Georgia and you've got South Carolina. If you can get over those two hurdles or split, I think if you split in the way the East is going to match up, and we'll look at the schedules, I think you've got a good shot to potentially have a bid for the SEC East. Because I'm not going to put Missouri back up there this year.
Yeah. Let me put this in perspective though, Shane. And I kind of believe that, and you're right. The whole season, kind of like we talked about, I think it was Missouri that had those 3 games, or somebody we talked about that had 3 games that determined their whole season. And with a well-defined kind of 1-2-3 structure in the East, if you think about who your competitors are, I mean, you can rule out maybe Missouri this year. You can probably rule out Vanderbilt. You can rule out Kentucky. You can probably rule out Tennessee. And you look at it, all you got to do is beat South Carolina and Georgia, or maybe even a combination of the two, depending on how things fall, and you could end up in Atlanta. But let me put this into perspective to you. They've got to play Florida State at the end of the year, and there's a very real chance that Florida could end up in Atlanta with no shot at all to make the 14 playoff if they won the SEC championship. Because I firmly believe if they lose that last game to Florida State, I'm not sure they make it. I mean, I really do not think that they make the playoff if you're looking at 1 or 2 losses and one of those being to Florida State. Well, especially if you have a loss to Alabama or somebody like that.
You know, I'm gonna have to say take that back and say they have no chance to compete for the East.
Yeah, that's true. But that playing Florida State is a very crazy thing to think about with Florida State where they are at right now.
I say that because I look at their schedule further and realize that they've got an opponent in the West that they're not going to win. You know? And so automatically they've got one SEC loss right there. If they get a second SEC loss, that really changes things. Because I was thinking, they could win both West opponents, but let's just go on and look at it. The first 2 games are give me's Idaho and Eastern Michigan. We're going to go on and give them their third game too. I hate to say that. It's at Florida. It's their SEC home opener, and it's Kentucky. So Kentucky does play tough down there, but I just, again, it's one of those situations where Kentucky's going to have to prove to me they can win these games before I can pick them.
Yeah.
Till I get to the Kentucky podcast, and then I'm going to tell you all the ways they can win these games. But after that 3-game stretch, they go to Alabama. Right there, they're going to start off the season 3-1. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and I think even though there's questions with Alabama, I mean, I firmly believe that the biggest question mark on defense is probably there's a lot of talent in the secondary. I think that is a place you're playing them. What is that? The 4th game of the year? Yeah, 4th game. Sorry, can't count. But you're playing them the 4th game of the year. There's still some things. I mean, I think Florida could lay on some more points on Alabama than maybe they would if they played, the second to last SEC game of the year. But I mean, that comes with, early season games. But I mean, honestly, I mean, I just don't think there's a chance for Florida to beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa this year.
Yeah, I mean, their West is brutal. I mean, they get a bye week and then they go up to Tennessee.
Which that's no push. I mean, I know Tennessee's not great. I mean, they're not going to be great this year, and we haven't done our Tennessee preview yet. But I don't know. That Tennessee LSU back-to-back is going to be a little tough. I mean, it's nothing to discount, I guess.
Yeah, Tennessee can surprise somebody. Just ask South Carolina last year.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at a game kind of like South Carolina next year. I think Tennessee could easily pick up one of those games, especially with more experience at the quarterback than they had last year.
I will tell you that if that happens for Florida, they're going to pack it in and fold.
Yeah, they have no shot.
If history is true, I mean, they lost Driscoll and they packed it up and fold. They looked deflated. They looked like a team that could not win. And so all of a sudden you come into Knoxville and you get handed your second straight SEC loss, your first SEC East loss, and knowing you've got to turn around and go play LSU the following week. That doesn't bode well. But I'm not going to give them that. I'm going to say they're winning.
Yeah, me too. I mean,
that situation's just a moot point. But if that were to happen, and that's what we can talk about, because that's what sports talk does. It talks about the what ifs.
Yeah.
And if that were to happen, Muschamp's a done man.
Let me bring up this question though, and I want to, maybe we'll get to this by the end of the schedule, but I would love to know your number on win-loss number, or just I guess wins, of a Muschamp retention? Because I think that number is higher than most people think.
I will tell you when I'm through.
Okay.
Because right now he's at 2 losses.
Yeah.
I'm going to give him a win at Missouri. Well, not at Missouri, it's at Florida. But when Missouri comes to Florida, I'll give Florida that win at home.
So I'll just go ahead and tell you, I have them winning, but I think this could be a game that decides his future. Because if you look at the next game that they have playing, I mean, especially if they ended up dropping a Tennessee game or something, that could be 3 straight SEC losses right there. If you drop to Missouri or if you drop to Tennessee, because they got Georgia up next.
Yes. And I'm going to give them a loss to Georgia.
Yep, same with me.
I'm going to give them a win at Vanderbilt.
Yep, me too.
But I'm going to give them a loss to South Carolina. I said they could win one or two of those, but I don't think they will. I wouldn't give it to them.
So in my mind, I don't know if we've gotten to this or not, but South Carolina is my perennial favorite. I know a lot of people like to put Georgia or Florida in there, but I think South Carolina is my perennial favorite. You got Dylan Thompson coming back, Mike Davis. I mean, I think it's more likely, which, we saw a lot of shakeup in the East, with South Carolina losing that game to Tennessee and Tennessee playing, I think it was Georgia close or whoever it was at the end of the season. I mean, obviously anybody can beat anybody week to week, but I think there's a better chance that they pick up that Georgia game than South Carolina. To me, South Carolina is an automatic loss in my mind.
Yes. I'm going to give them a win when Eastern Kentucky comes to town.
I sure hope so.
Then I'm going to give them a loss at Florida State.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, I know we blew through that schedule. I think it's the quickest any of us have gone, but we're in so much agreement here. I've got them with 5 losses.
Yep, I'm at 7-5, and I really want to give them that Missouri loss, but I don't know if I could make them 6-6 this year. So, because I think I might have picked them Missouri to win that game because I ended up with Missouri having 9 or 10 wins. So.
I will say now that I've looked at the schedule and gone through it verbally that Muschamp at 7-5 will stay if they're close losses.
That's a mighty fine line though, because 7-5 is not an impressive schedule or an impressive year.
No, but it's vast improvement.
Yeah, that is true.
I mean, you go from 4-8 to 7-4 or 7-5. That's a big flip-flop. So you've changed the tide. You've turned the ship around, so to speak. You're going in the right direction. You've become competitive. Now, if he gets blown out in those losses, that might be another subject. And that's when you say it's a fine line. It's a fine line to determine what's a competitive game. I don't necessarily say it's got to be close. It's got to be competitive.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can have. I mean, this happens to Alabama a lot. You can have a 10-point game, and it seems like there's no competition at all. Just the way that people score back and forth or something like that. If you never get within 10 points and you lose by 10, well, that doesn't seem too competitive. I mean, I guess if you're Florida and you lose to Alabama by 10, then I guess you consider that kind of a decent loss, but. It's definitely objective the way that you look at it.
Yes, it is. And, the good news for Muschamp, I believe, I mean, he even agrees that this year he's on the hot seat. He said that at Media Days a few weeks ago or a month ago now. He understands the situation he's in. But I think the athletic director likes him as a head coach, likes the direction he's taking the program. And, from the outside looking in, that program was left in shambles.
Yeah, it really was.
No wonder Urban Meyer had health problems. He knew he was on a sinking ship. And so, rats jump off ships first, isn't that right? Don't they go to dry land?
I think so.
I mean, he left them in a bad situation. And Muschamp inherited that. He has matured as a head coach over the last couple of years too. His first season, I thought we talked about this on the podcast before you came on board, Nick, that literally we thought he was going to have to be taken off the field in a stretcher with a black bag put over his body because he had died on the field of an aneurysm. He was so vocal and mad and physical, you could just see it. I mean, he's calmed. He's still an intense coach on the field, but he has changed that a little bit. So he's matured as a head coach as well. So 7-5 and being competitive, I think, gets him one more year. Because you look back and you look and see there's a lot of talent on this team that's still coming back next year. You know, I don't know how many NFL prospects are on this program, how many juniors that would be eligible for the NFL draft. I mean, because all indications are, if you're thinking quarterbacks, Driscoll's going to have to be Heisman worthy to be considered at this point, because this is supposed to be a really heavy quarterback draft, if I remember correctly. We're going way in the future now, but you know, next year's draft is going to be quarterback heavy, so you know there's a good chance he's returning again next year. Now all of a sudden you're getting the experience to go with a 7-5 record. You're getting Georgia without some of the players they have. You're getting South Carolina without some of the players they have. It could be a different ball game, you know. But you're also going to have a Tennessee that's going to be better. You've got a Kentucky, by all indications, the way they're recruiting. They're going to be more competitive. I won't say they're better. They're going to be more competitive, which means they could sneak up and beat somebody they shouldn't. Vanderbilt, if Derek Mason does what he's supposed to be doing, and if you listen to him in media days, Vanderbilt's ready to compete for the East. Pinkel's not going to have Missouri drop that much. So even though Florida's getting better, you know, it's not like the East is going to get worse because of that. So
yeah, exactly. And those are a lot of good points. And I think one of the biggest saving graces for Muschamp is the fact that he's shown improvement. I think you're exactly right that he's grown into this head coaching job, because, I mean, I think a lot of people forget, you know, the position that he was in Texas and in the coach in waiting and everything like that, and then he comes to Florida. And you're exactly right. That first year, I don't really remember what game it was. I think it was kind of a smaller game, you know, like a non-conference game or something.
It was early in the season.
Okay, yeah. And I remember, like, just seeing him yelling and, like, the veins bulging out of his neck and him turning just a fiery red. And he has definitely turned into a different coach. And I think we maybe will see that this year, that he's going to kind of be able to convert that energy and maybe channel it into the team instead of, you know, making himself look like an imbecile out there sometimes. But I think the saving grace for him is the fact that last year was so bad mainly because of some things that were totally out of his control. I mean, coming off that Sugar Bowl loss to Louisville, I mean, that was kind of weird. I mean, they kind of laid an egg, but at the same time, Louisville was a pretty good team that year. And then coming off 4-8, I mean, losing your starting quarterback, that's hard for any SEC coach to survive. I mean, just, you know, game planning, anything you think about, it's hard to go without your starting quarterback. But another thing, too, is that is interesting to me, and that's why I keep bringing this up, is like you said, they have played hot seat with just about every other possible position coach that they can, and they have shown their dedication to him for years now. I mean, how many teams do you see very often that go through 3 offensive coordinators in 3 different years and actually fire their offensive coordinators? You know what I mean? It's not like a Jeremy Pruitt at Alabama or Florida State where he's leaving to go somewhere else. I mean, these are guys that didn't succeed, so they pushed him out, and they're showing ultimate support in their head coach. And now, I mean, he's kind of your last option. I think a 7-5, he definitely survives, but I think you're right. I mean, it all depends on what those 5 losses look like.
Yeah, it depends on what those 5 losses look like. And if he's on a short leash this year, it's razor thin the next year. You know, so.
And it definitely doesn't help him that I think top to bottom that this might be the strongest that the East has been in years. I mean, you look at where Missouri is today. I mean, Vanderbilt had that, you know, rise to success the past couple of years, but like you said, Derek Mason, we're not sure where he could be in a year or two. I mean, the future, even though he has talent returning and even though he probably gets to hold on to Driscoll for a couple more years, I mean, you got to think that Tennessee will probably be a better team the way that they're recruiting. And depending on who they draw over the next year or two from the West, I mean, he could be in the same situation, and it's not going to be an easy road, and he's definitely fighting an uphill battle. I mean, this isn't something that, I mean, obviously he could fix this in 1 year by getting to the SEC championship, and that probably buys you at least 2 more years. But with what we're predicting right now, he is not in a good situation at all.
No, you're right. I mean, if you look at the East, you've got some strength up there, but you also have a lot of teams that have not been really not great, not in some situations not even good, and they're getting better. On top of that, there's always turmoil in Florida. I mean, the old Kentucky coach that went down there to be I think it was receivers coach, Joker Phillips.
Yeah.
He left, he resigned because of recruiting violations. There's always something that's happening in the state of Florida with the Gators, and you never know how much of that's going to have an impact long term on his position as the head coach.
And you talk about a destination job. I mean, Spurrier kind of coached Florida into being a destination job. I mean, they've had the pedigree, kind of like Alabama. I mean, a lot of the SEC teams have the tradition and have been there before on a successful level. But I think it also, you have to speak to what kind of job Florida is. It's a very high-stress job. It's one that is very unforgiving. Even though you're in the East, you still have to draw these, West non-conference games, and you have not out of, your division games. And then you've got Georgia, which is a huge rivalry. And then not to mention, I think Florida is very comparable to a program like Texas. We've heard all these things that Charlie Strong is going through, how he can't piss off the boosters and how he's already made a wrong impression and how he's running camp. I mean, he's doing things now where he's took the longhorn off the helmet and all this stuff. I mean, I think Florida, there's a lot of external pressures that come in from the boosters and things that a lot of these other teams, like your Kentuckys, like your Tennessees, like your Missouris, like your Vanderbilts, even South Carolina. I mean, we talked about last podcast about what Steve Spurrier has done at South Carolina and what the expectations were when he got there. I mean, they were literally nothing, and now he's getting them into national prominence. But at Florida, it's just the opposite. You're kind of always playing your way out of trouble, like you said.
I don't remember the number, and I don't know if you were on the podcast where we looked at it, but when Steve Spurrier came to South Carolina, there was one $1 million donor. And I want to think there's now like 14 or 15.
Yeah, I can't remember. I mean, that makes total sense, though.
$1 million donors on an annual basis. So that's what the successful programs can do over time. And that's where Florida is. They've got a lot of, and that's where Texas is, and Alabama. There's lots of wealthy donors that want to see their programs continue to do well and continue to be in the discussion to be one of the best teams in their conference. And so, I don't know. I wouldn't want Muschamp's position right now because I don't think it's going to get any better for him. Doesn't mean he's a bad coach. It just means that the situation he's in an almost no-win situation unless he can truly win it all.
Yeah, and I mean, and then you look at it. I mean, it could end up. I mean, we've seen the turnover. I mean, the Gene Chizik situation is a very odd situation, but you can't discount that he won a national championship, and within a year or two, he was gone. So, I think the way that the SEC is now, there's more. I mean, there's more pressure than ever before on SEC coaches, and it's kind of a shame because I think Muschamp's a very, I don't know if I'd say, I mean, he's a very fun guy to watch, and he's a fun guy to have in the SEC, and you'd hate to see him leave. But from a Florida standpoint, last year was rough, and that is 4 wins is just inexcusable at Florida no matter what happens. I think you're right. I mean, they obviously gave up. There's a couple games they probably could have won, but I don't know. He's definitely in a bad situation.
Yeah, well, I mean, you made an interesting point, and I really don't even know how to take that and expand on it. But when you look at Auburn and what happened with that situation, realistically, the boosters from the beginning, I mean, from what I understand, right after the national championship, that wasn't the right coach for them, because he wasn't the one that got them the national championship.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for that Auburn situation was the backing by Jay Jacobs, the athletic director. Him and Gene Chizik had a very long-standing relationship, and even when Gene Chizik was there and left, he had always aimed to get Gene Chizik back. I don't know if he ever dreamed that it would be as a head coach, but Jay Jacobs kind of rode that ship until the very end. But you're exactly right. I think a lot of the donors, a lot of the fans, although they didn't really want to admit it, it wasn't the coaching job. It was a Cam Newton job. I mean, it really was. I mean, he was the best player that we've ever seen in college football, maybe since Bo Jackson. And that was a unique,
Well,
a unique situation.
some were saying it was an offensive coordinator's coaching job, not the head coach's job, that won that national championship.
Yeah, I mean, you look how bad their defense was as well. I mean, the offensive side won them the national championship. That's for sure.
I mean, Spurrier admitted that. What did he say about it? About Auburn's national championship. So,
I can't remember.
but all kidding aside, Muschamp's not in that situation. I mean, there was never, and who knows what Roper is, but I don't think after 1 year he can be that person. Wow. Because Malzahn had all this stuff coming in. He had excitement coming into Auburn. Roper's coming from Duke. That's not the same excitement that Malzahn brought. So I don't think that you're going to have that same pressures from the donors to have him replaced if he does that. It's going to buy him more time, is where I'm trying to go with this. If he were to win something big like the SEC championship. So, I don't know. I hate to say that closes the book on Florida, but I don't have much else to add. It's their defense is going to be suspect. Their offensive line is going to be suspect. They should have a great program to put on the field, but we really don't know what's going to happen until you start seeing them play.
Yeah, and like I said to begin the podcast, I think the most intriguing thing about Florida is the fact that they are the dark horse to win the East. I mean, they have some of the players, but I think they're going to have to draw every last thing they can. I mean, Driscoll's going to have maybe not a Heisman Trophy year, but maybe, I mean, he's going to have to be one of the top quarterbacks in the SEC to win the East for them. I mean, you've got to look at some things that have to happen for them to win, but at the same time, I mean, they could very easily go 6-6, or, I mean, heck, if they drop the game they shouldn't, not even make a bowl game this year, which is kind of, I can't remember the last time. I mean, I'm sure there has been a time, but I cannot remember the last time that we could easily have a team go 5-8, or have a team go, or 5-7, and then have a team go 10-2.
Well, if they have a losing record, I don't know how far back you would have to go, but it was the first time since 1979 that they had a losing record last year. To do that back-to-back
is inexcusable.
I mean, when you look at it, they have somewhat of an excuse because one of their out-of-conference games is Florida State. But they make up for that because they're in the East. And they're going to have, Kentucky. They're going to have Vanderbilt. And so you're looking at just having to find a couple wins to be bowl eligible every year. If you're a team like Florida. And Florida State hasn't been this perennial powerhouse that they just automatically became. They used to be in the Bowden, but I mean, think about when they really were somebody to take serious. I mean, it's been a good 10, 15 years.
Yeah, but you have to realize this is the Florida that they live in too. I mean, the Jimbo Fisher era, I mean, the way he's recruiting, I'm not sure there's going to be that much of a drop-off when Jameis Winston leaves.
Oh, I agree totally. No, I mean, Florida State football's back to stay for a while. They're on another huge upswing, just like Bobby Bowden had them, in the mid and early 90s.
Right.
So, but after that period, Florida State's been down was down for a decade, in my opinion. I mean, they were always good, but they were never a team that you were expecting to compete for a national championship year after year.
Oh, for sure. And I think that's what gave Florida and Miami the ability to rise to national prominence, is the fact that you had this in-conference rivalry game, and Florida State was just not an automatic loss like it had been in the past.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly where I was going with that. And so, they've got to manufacture some wins every year going forward, with Florida State being on their schedule, because they don't have that fourth out of conference just give me win anymore, and that's something new that they're going to have to adjust to, and they're going to have to find a way to do that with an improving SEC East and an SEC West opponent that stays on their calendar, that's LSU.
Right. Which is very, and this could be one of the most unique scheduling situations in the country. I mean, you think about Alabama and some of these other top teams. Not too many of them have in or out of conference rivalry games that stay. I mean, you look at some of the Texas and Texas A&M, that game's gone, and Texas hadn't been where Texas A&M has been in the past. But that Florida State game really kind of determines how successful they're going to be for the next 5 years, which is highly unfortunate for Florida, because Florida State is just light years ahead of where they are today. But
there's not many of those left, especially when you're talking out of conference. I mean, if you look inside the SEC, South Carolina has Clemson.
Right.
It's
a good game to compare it to.
That's pretty close.
Yeah.
I still don't think it's at the level that Florida State is supposed to be at. It's not, because Florida's not where they're supposed to be at. But you look, and the SEC, in my opinion, probably has more of those games than any other conference, because you have some of those, especially in the East. You got Florida State, you got South Carolina, Clemson, you got Georgia Tech, you got Kentucky, Louisville. Vanderbilt's been having Wake Forest. I don't know if that's not really a set in stone rivalry game.
And that's probably, not to interrupt you, but that's probably a product of the SEC still only having 8 conference games. I mean, you look at these teams in the Pac-12 and the Big Ten and the Big 12 and all these teams that have gone, or all these conferences that have gone to 9 conference games. These type of games are games that are going to get axed, because if you're having to play yet another conference game from, if you're looking at the SEC, if they ever went to 9 games, picking up a third game from the East, you just can't. I mean, it's hard to risk that with all this, extra college football playoff and all these other things. I mean, it's just not worth playing a team like that, which is sad. You want to see these games.
Well, if they went to 9 games, they would have to throw out the rule that one of those. Well, no, not so much that one of those outside opponents had to be from a Power 5 conference.
Yeah, that's true.
You would almost have to throw that out the window at that point. Because right now, if you look at the doing so, that's how these can stay in place, and that how they will stay in place. That almost guaranteed the fact that these rivalry games that we're talking about are going to stay because of that reason right there. You're not just going to say, well, I need to play a Power 5 conference, so I'm not going to play Florida State anymore.
Right.
Talk about the backlash that would create. At least Texas A&M had, the fact that they weren't in the same conferences anymore is why they wanted to end the rivalry. That would have been a perfect one to keep for Texas A&M, but they chose to let that one go. And for Texas A&M, that probably was a bad thing, at least in the short term.
I mean, you think about the recruiting and everything else that's gone on. If they could beat off on Texas for the last 2 years when Johnny Manziel was there, think about what more. I mean, the Texas A&M fan base is higher than it's ever been, but think about what that does for the dynamics in the state of Texas.
You think it's crazy now, it would be even worse.
Yeah, because they would actually, I think we firmly believe that they would have won both those games, but if they actually got on the field and did it, that'd be pretty insane.
Yeah, no, and by all indications, they would have probably won this year too. If you put them together, I would have given you Texas A&M. And so we all know that it was Texas understood the writing on the wall and knew that this was a great time for them to get rid of this rivalry, because it was worse for them, because they knew their chances of winning were going to be harder when Texas A&M going to the SEC. And they were the ones that controlled the cards because they're the ones that had the money.
Right.
And so, you know, that's an interesting discussion that I wasn't expecting to have tonight. But it's a good one. I mean, you know, that right there and alone is part of the reason why Florida is going to be a hard seat to fill at the SEC championship game. I just don't see them doing it this year or next.
Yeah, me either.
So, any parting shots you got before we wrap up, Nick?
Not really. I think we've got a very exciting week ahead of previews. I know, like you said, we've got Ole Miss coming up, and what'd you say, Vandy too?
Yes.
So I love hearing you guys talk about Vandy. I think I said before the pre-show, and then we've got Blair and a couple of our Ole Miss guys coming on, so that's going to be awesome. So hey, stay tuned for the rest of the week.
Yep, I'm excited. Guys, thanks so much for listening. Look for 2 more podcasts this week as we get our SEC previews all in the books, and we're going to do all of them, all 14 teams, before you get the kickoff, so you are ready to be in the know. And with that, we will call this podcast done.